Beautiful. When did God become more than a word to you? Maybe it was in an instance. Maybe it's one time in space that you can remember that God became more than a word. Or maybe, just as Chad's story this morning, it's a revelation, an evolution over time of God revealing God's self to you. I believe God is constantly pursuing us equally as much as we continue to seek to know God. That the Word becomes flesh. That as we celebrate the birth of Christ, Christmas Eve, that we celebrate God incarnate when the Word became flesh. But when did the Word become flesh to you? Maybe it's a continual revelation over time. I know for me, in this wonderful, sacred season of life that I'm in, I read Mary's praises, and the Word is even more flesh than before for me. That in this season of life, there's a different revelation and evolution that I've come to know God on a more sacred, deep level. That I come to this ancient, wonderful text of Mary, and I can't help but understand that she knows a lot more than we give her credit in that wonderful song, right? We sing, "Mary, did you know?" Oh, she knew. Mary knew. Much more than we even give her credit. That she is revealing God's self to us in a way that we can't even quite grasp or fathom. Now, I love the Christmas story. I love the nativity scene with all the animals, the story of Joseph and Mary traveling miles and miles, all to birth a baby in a manger. But I think we focus too much on the baby. Right? Yes, the Messiah, God incarnate, needs all of our attention. All of our praises. Wow. But what about Mary? What about the way in which God chose to come into the world? What if that's part of the Christmas story? That God, in all of God's magnificence, all of God, the God of the cosmos, could have chosen any way to come into the world. In fact, let's get practical with the ancient world context. In a patriarchal run world where it was all about the religious elite, it was about kings and rulers, dominion, and it was about power. And God could have come as a king, as a ruler, as the most religious elite. Yet God, in all of God's mysterious, wondrous ways, chose to come through the womb of a young Jewish girl, a young unwed Jewish girl, a young unwed, marginalized, oppressed, poor Jewish girl, and came as the most fragile and most dependent version of a human being. What if that's part of the Christmas story? What if the way in which God desires relationship with you and I is shown in the way in which God came into this chaotic, violent, power-seeking world? That Mary's Magnificat is singing praises to God for all of who God is. God is gentle and humble. That God favors the oppressed, the poor, and the marginalized. That seeks justice and mercy. And even within her Magnificat, she uses these words of strength and might. Because I believe she was telling us about God's power, about the reality of God's power. That God's power is nothing that this world tells us what power should be. I remember my first semester of seminary. I was given the assignment to write a statement of faith. My very first statement of faith I ever officially wrote. And I remember I used all kinds of theological fancy words like omniscient, omnipresent, and I used the word omnipotent. Omnipotent means all-powerful. And I'll never forget, my professor returned the paper to me, and she circled the word omnipotent. She says, "Do you really believe God is all-powerful?" I said, "I don't know. It sounds good, though." And I've been sitting with that question for years now. Do I believe God is all-powerful? Now, come to find out, this brilliant professor, one of my favorite mentors, she actually wrote her entire doctoral dissertation on God's power, and it's published into a brilliant text. So it made sense why she posed such a question to my young seminarian mind. Is God all-powerful? I come to this text of Mary. I stand here 39 weeks pregnant. And I go, there's a lot of images we attribute to God. God as Lord and Father to child, and God as Master, King of Kings. There's some unfortunate images of God we attribute, like God as genie, granter of all wishes. God as the puppet master, and we're just puppeteers. My favorite image, especially in this season of life, it's not a new image, but it's the image of God as an expectant mother with the unborn child. That maybe God's power is more of an influence. Because if you've ever been pregnant, or you've known anyone who's ever been pregnant, you know that that unborn child is about to influence that woman's body. Physically, hormonally, but emotionally and spiritually. Just as much as the well-being, the physical well-being, the mental and emotional well-being of that mother also is influencing that child. That the two have this mutual agreement of co-creation. But I can't tell this baby to have blue eyes. I can't tell this baby to have blonde hair like me. I have dreams and aspirations for this baby. That there's this invitation that God invites us to be mutual influencers, to be mutual creators in the divine creation of all of the cosmos. That maybe God's power looks more like this: gentle, humble, inviting. But that the unborn child is still more dependent upon me than I am of this child. And this question even went a step further, in this pregnancy specifically. It was early on in the pregnancy. We had one of our first ultrasounds. You could see all the limbs. The technician was going over, seeing the brain, seeing the heart, the stomach, counting the fingers and toes. But she hovered over the heart for a little bit too much time. To which I said, "Okay, is something wrong?" She says, "I'm very concerned about your child's heart." I said, "Okay, and what should we do about this?" And she goes on to give us lists of tests that we can run, ultrasounds we can do. And then, of course, I go a step further, as I always do, and I say, "Okay, say we do all these tests and everything that you've given us, and what you're perceiving is actually conclusive." And she says, "Well, at this point in the pregnancy, you have options. And those options are political options that divide our entire nation, that divide our entire church. Those political options are not the emphasis of this sermon. If you leave this sanctuary today and you think this is a political agenda by any means, you failed to listen to what I'm saying." But my husband and I left that ultrasound in silence. We had anxiety in our hearts and our minds about this precious child. And then I sat with that question again. Do I believe God is all powerful? Wow, God's given us a lot of power. Watch our nightly news. God invites us, empowers us to use our power for good or evil, for life or death. But maybe the real Christmas story is that God of the cosmos, is all powerful, but looks at us with such marvel and wonder and excitement and aspirations and dreams and purposes and thoughts of goodness and kindness and mercy. And God invites us to do the same. And God says, I hope they lean into love. That I will give them this power to be my co-creators. That I have this power as the divine God of the universe. But I hope they choose love. Maybe that's the Christmas story. Amen.